On debate, Senator Coyle.
Honourable colleagues, I rise today to add my voice in support of Bill S-211, the Modern Slavery Act. I want to commend Senator Milleville Deschênes for her leadership in sponsoring this important bill and bringing to our attention the modern-day travesty of widespread forced labour and the extensive use of child workers in our global supply chains. Slavery was officially abolished in 1981 when Mauritania finally outlawed the practice. Forced labour itself was first tackled by the International Labour Organization in 1957 when they passed the Abolition of Forced Labour Convention. But we know it still exists today in many forms, some more hidden and subtle than others. Many view this as a problem for less developed countries, but complex supply chains are reinforcing the practice around the world. As the Business and Human Rights Resource Centre report noted, modern slavery is everywhere, from the construction of FIFA World Cup stadiums in Qatar to the cotton farms of Uzbekistan, from cattle ranches in Paraguay to fisheries in Thailand and the Philippines, to agriculture in Italy, from sweatshops in Brazil and Argentina to berry pickers in Sweden. The production chains of clothes, food, and services consumed globally are tainted with forced labor. In Senator Boyer's recent speech in support of this bill, she reminded us of the scourge of human trafficking in our own country, particularly the sexual exploitation of Indigenous women and girls. Knowing for certain that no slavery was involved in the final product we buy or service we pay for is far more difficult than one may think. A final product may go through several producers, manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, and any type of stress on the supply chain could lead to rush orders and subcontract work. Finding out what company produced your favorite T-shirt is a lot simpler than knowing what types of labor practices are in place on a cotton farm. Mais les compagnies ont une obligation morale de comprendre leur propre chaîne d'approvisionnement et de prendre des mesures pour assurer qu'il n'y a aucun cas d'esclavage dans la fabrication de leurs produits. There have been recent media accounts of shocking allegations of coerced labor and child labor. The Guardian reported earlier this month that high street coffee shop giant Starbucks has been caught up in a child labor row after an investigation revealed that children under 13, some as young as 8, were working on farms in Guatemala that supplied the chain with its beans. Channel 4's dispatches filmed the children working 40-hour weeks in grueling conditions for a daily wage little more than the price of a latte. The beans are also supplied to Nespresso, owned by Nestle. Hollywood's Nespresso marketing face, George Clooney, has indicated a concern with the findings of the investigation, as have both companies, of course. The Globe and Mail reported earlier this month that Bombardier says it is concerned about a new report by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute that links it and other companies to the evident forced labor of Muslim minorities in China. In a recent CBC Sunday edition segment, Claire Church of the Winnipeg-based International Institute for Sustainable Development raised a red flag on the issue of green conflict minerals. According to Ms. Church, la demande de technologie d'énergie verte est la demande correspondante à ce qui a trait aux matériaux nécessaires pour fabriquer, transporter et installer ces technologies est prévu d'augmenter dramatiquement dans les années et décennies à venir. Demand for materials like cobalt, lithium, and rare earth 1 is expected to grow at unprecedented rates due to their strategic role in the production of wind turbines, electric vehicles, and energy storage. Unfortunately, not all strategic reserves of these minerals are found in countries applying international best practices to mining sector management. On the contrary, the mining of cobalt in the Democratic Republic of the Congo has so often been connected to violence that the mineral has been dubbed the blood diamond of this decade. Further, some rare earth mines have been called sites of exploitation due to incidents of child labor, high levels of exposure to toxic substances, and dangerous working conditions. Ms. Church says that with many of the world's mining companies headquartered in Canada, and with Toronto seen as the top global hub for mining finance, that Canada could be a huge force for change. Canada could be a leader. As Senator Lankin, in her recent speech on this bill, said, the more access to information consumers and investors have, the more socially responsible behavior they can demand from the companies they buy from and invest in. The House of Commons report on child labour found that in 2016, 1 in 10 children had been part of some form of child labour. This represents 152 million children around the world. Senator Omidvar provided us with a devastatingly clear picture of the nature and extent of the international modern slavery tragedy in her speech earlier this week, and she reminded us that women and children account for 71% of modern slaves. As signatories to the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, Canada agrees with Article 32 and recognizes that children have the right to be protected from economic exploitation and from performing any work that is likely to be hazardous or to interfere with the child's education or to be harmful to the child's health or physical, mental, spiritual, moral, or social development. In 2016, colleagues, World Vision published a supply chain risk report for Canada, our country. It found that Canadian imports of 50 common products at risk of child and forced labor were worth $34.3 billion in 2015. These products include items such as bananas, I had one this morning, blueberries, had some today, fireworks, minerals, silk, and toys. Hope to be playing with some of those next week. And there are at least 1,264 companies operating in Canada with links to goods and countries with high incidences of child and forced labor. Colleagues, when we know better, we must do better. Bill S-211 will go a long way in addressing this systemic issue. It is not the only step needed, of course. Work must continue to empower governments and communities to take the necessary actions to protect their children. But it represents a step in the right direction. To quote Senator Milville-Deschênes, it is a bill that will help Canada to more strictly adhere to the letter of its international commitments. It does this by introducing requirements for large companies to produce an annual report that they will publish on their website and file with the Minister of Public Safety on how they are preventing and reducing the risk of forced or child labor in their supply chains. This bill also details the penalties for noncompliance with the reporting requirements, a necessary step in ensuring our supply chains are free from child and forced labor. D'autres juridictions ont introduit des projets de loi similaires, incluant le Royaume-Uni et l'Australie. Ces mesures législatives portent sur les informations publiées par les entreprises pour mettre en évidence tout risque accru dans leur chaîne d'approvisionnement et pour présenter tout changement à leur chaîne d'approvisionnement si les informations mettent à jour des cas d'abus. One of the goals with this reporting is to leverage the information gathered in the hopes that suppliers choose to change their practices at the risk of losing their contracts. This is not a new practice, colleagues. Non-financial corporate reporting has been increasing over the past few years, and in 2017, 78% of the world's largest companies disclosed some form of non-financial information within their annual reports. In many instances, this came from pressure from the stock market as a desire for corporate responsibility increased. Private corporations have already started working with civil society groups to address problems in their supply chains and have already introduced voluntary measures to address those problems. Moreover, several Canadian companies are already obligated to report on their supply chains as they operate in jurisdictions with supply chain transparency legislation, including the UK, California, and Australia, as mentioned earlier. Canada has committed to eliminating modern slavery by 2030. along with human trafficking, forced labor, and child labor as part of our commitment to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. In line with this commitment, and in response to the House Subcommittee on Human Rights report entitled A Call to Action, Ending the Use of Forms of Child Labor in Supply Chains, Canada began a consultation process on labor exploitation in global supply chains last June. Bill S-211 is not perfect, and there are areas of further study that will be helpful to explore in order to make this piece of legislation stronger. We have already received a submission on this from the International and Human Rights Clinic of UBC's Law School. Examining and recommending improvements is what the committee will be charged to do. In closing, I would like to quote Aminata Diallo, the main protagonist in Lawrence Hill's brilliant tome, The Book of Negroes, that I decided was what it meant to be a slave. Your past didn't matter. In the present, you were invisible, and you had no claim on the future. Colleagues, let's support this next step on our complicated human path towards justice to ensure that all women, men, and children everywhere can value their past, be alive and visible in the present, and can count on a future free of bondage and exploitation. I support Bill S-211, and I hope you will agree to send it to committee as soon as possible. Merci, Walalio. Thank you.